The year 1341 BC began for me at Akhetaten in the quiet of an unremarkable household. I remember desert heat most clearly. The world, soft and unhurried around me, the days unfolding slowly. You need not follow every word that follows. Let your eyes close whenever they wish, and simply rest here with me as the story unfolds. The air inside the palace held a stillness that felt heavier than the stone walls themselves. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced the high windows, moving with a grace that suggested they were alive. I was a child of royal lineage, though my early years were spent in a rhythm that felt ordinary to my small hands. The scent of dried myrrh and cedar wood drifted from open jars on low tables, filling the chambers with a calming, earthy aroma that never seemed to fade. Outside, the distant sound of the Nile provided a steady, rhythmic backdrop to the silence within. Heavy linen curtains swayed slightly in the cool breeze, creating a soothing motion that mirrored the slow passage of time. A single oil lamp flickered on a low stool, its flame steady and unwavering against the encroaching twilight. The walls were painted with scenes of harvest and abundance, their colors still vibrant despite the centuries that had passed. This quiet space offered a sanctuary from the demands of statecraft, a place where the young king could rest his weary body. The air felt thick with the weight of history, yet it remained peaceful and untroubled by the worries of the world outside. I remember the texture of the gold that adorned the furniture, cool and smooth under my fingertips. It was a metal that seemed to hold the warmth of the sun even when the desert night grew cold. The artisans worked in the great workshops of the capital under the guidance of experienced masters, preparing surfaces of stone and wood with layers of fine gypsum plaster. Their hands moved with a patience that I would later try to emulate in my own small ways. Once the surface was prepared, they applied vibrant pigments derived from natural minerals. Lapis lazuli provided deep blues, while malachite offered rich greens for the scenes. Red ochre and yellow ochre created the warm tones of skin and sand. The painting process involved careful outlining followed by the filling of areas with solid color. This technique allowed for a clarity of form that remained consistent across different media. The influence of the previous reign remained visible in the early works attributed to me, though I was but a child then. Figures were depicted with elongated features and soft, rounded anatomical forms. The scenes often showed the royal family in moments of domestic intimacy and affection. These images reflected a theological shift that had occurred just a generation prior. As I matured, the style began to incorporate more traditional elements of pharaonic art. The elongated features gradually gave way to the idealized proportions of the Old Kingdom. The scenes of daily life remained, but they were framed within a more formal structure. The restoration of the old temples required a return to the iconography of the past. The text on the stela records that temples across Egypt had fallen into ruin during the reign of my father and were subsequently restored by me. This restoration effort necessitated the retraining of artists in the older, more rigid styles. The workshops had to adapt quickly to meet the demands of the religious revival. My name change from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun symbolized this broader cultural shift. The artistic output of my reign reflects this complex transition between two distinct eras. The decoration of the tomb is similar in content and color to that of the tomb of my successor. This similarity suggests that the same team of artists worked on both royal tombs. The continuity of style indicates a stable workshop until the end of my brief life. The physical evidence of my life and life. Death remains preserved in the sands of time. The light in the tomb was soft and golden, filtering through the cracks in the sealed entrance. Dust motes danced slowly in the still air, suspended in a silence that had lasted for thousands of years. The walls were covered in vibrant paintings of the afterlife, depicting fields of reeds and gentle rivers. A single wooden chair stood in the corner, its legs carved to resemble the paws of a lion. The wood was dark and smooth, worn by the touch of hands long turned to dust. Nearby, a small alabaster jar held the scent of myrrh, faint but still perceptible in the cool darkness. The canes leaned against the wall, their gold caps catching the dim light from the torch. I was born into a world already fractured, a child of a lineage that had stretched back to the very foundations of the two lands. My father, the great king, had walked a path that few could follow, a path of radical change that shook the very pillars of the state. There I did live. He was the one who sought to see the face of the sun disk and to turn the world away from the old gods. I was named the living image of that disk, born in the city of the horizon, where the light was the only law. The air in the palace was thick with the scent of burning incense and the low hum of priests who whispered of a single deity. I was a child of the new order, yet I carried the blood of the old in my veins, a bridge between two very different eras of history. The foundations of my reign were laid in the quiet years of my childhood, before I ascended to the throne. My early life set the stage for a restoration that would define the brief years of my rule. The boy who was born with name grew into the man who would return the old gods to their rightful places. This journey began in the sun-drenched city of the horizon and ended in the shadow of the western mountains. The silence of the archives allows the imagination to fill in the details of those childhood days. I walked the long halls of the palace and learned the ways of the court. I listened to the advice of my elders and watched the rituals of the state with wide, unblinking eyes. My early life was a time of quiet growth and preparation for the challenges that lay ahead. The young king's life was a bridge between two very different eras of Egyptian history. He carried the hopes of a nation that sought to return to its former glory. The early years of my life set the stage for the restoration that would define my reign. The young pharaoh received his artistic education within the shadow of a rapidly shifting theological landscape. My instructors were likely the veteran artisans who had served the court during the Amarna period. These masters possessed a deep understanding of the fluid, naturalistic style that defined the preceding era. They taught the boy king to observe the world with a keen and unfiltered eye. The curriculum emphasized the rendering of light and shadow upon the human form. Students learned to capture the subtle movements of the body in daily life. This approach marked a distinct departure, I said, from the rigid conventions of earlier dynasties. I absorbed these techniques while the capital city still bore the marks of change. The artistic development of the boy king was a synthesis of old and new traditions. I learned to balance the intimate realism of the new era with the formal grandeur of tradition. This balance became the hallmark of the style that would later define my reign. The artisans worked in the great workshops of the capital under the guidance of experienced masters. They prepared the surfaces of stone and wood with a patience that seemed to stretch beyond a single lifetime. The palace at the horizon eventually fell into disuse as the capital moved back to the ancient city of Thebes. The boy king and his court traveled to the old city to restore the temples and the old religious order. This journey marked the end of the Amarna period and the beginning of a new era in Egyptian history. My early life was a time of learning and adaptation to a rapidly changing world. I grew from a child named for the sun disk into a man named for the hidden god. This transformation reflected the broader transformation of the Egyptian state during my time. The legacy of my early years would influence the art and culture of the subsequent decades. My health was generally good, as no major congenital defects were found in the examination of my remains. I lived a life that was both privileged and burdened by the weight of the crown from a very young age. The stories of my childhood are few, but they paint a picture of a boy growing up in extraordinary circumstances. The silence of the historical record regarding my specific daily activities leaves much to the imagination of modern scholars. The focus of the records remains on the political and religious shifts rather than the personal life of the child. My education prepared me for a role that required both spiritual and political acumen. I learned to rule with the guidance of those who had served my father and my grandfather before me. The wisdom of my advisors and the strength of my own character guided me through these years. I navigated these challenges with a quiet determination that would define my brief but significant reign. My early life was marked by the constant tension between the old ways and the new religious order. The restoration of the old gods was a gradual process that began during my childhood and continued into my adulthood. I became a symbol of unity for a people who had been divided by religious conflict. The palace at the horizon eventually fell into disuse as the capital moved back to Thebes. The boy king and his court traveled to the ancient city to restore the temples and the old religious order. This journey marked the end of the Amarna period and the beginning of a new era in Egyptian history. My early life was a time of learning and adaptation to a rapidly changing world. I grew from a child named for the sun disk into a man named for the hidden god. This transformation reflected the broader transformation of the Egyptian state during my time. The legacy of my early years would influence the art and culture of the subsequent decades. My health was generally good, as no major congenital defects were found in the examination of my remains. I lived a life that was both privileged and burdened by the weight of the crown from a very young age. The stories of my childhood are few, but they paint a picture of a boy growing up in extraordinary circumstances. The silence of the historical record regarding my specific daily activities leaves much to the imagination of modern scholars. The focus of the records remains on the political and religious shifts rather than the personal life of the child. My education prepared me for a role that required both spiritual and political acumen. I learned to rule with the guidance of those live who had served my father and my grandfather before me. The foundations of my reign were laid in the quiet years of my childhood before I ascended to the throne. My life was a bridge between two very different eras of Egyptian history, I said, and I carried the hopes of a nation that sought to return to its former glory. The early years of my life set the stage for the restoration that would define my reign. The boy who was born the living image of the sun lived. Dis grew into the man who would restore the old gods. This journey began in the sun-drenched city of the horizon and ended in the shadow of the western mountains. My early life was a time of preparation for the challenges that lay ahead. The silence of the archives allows the imagination to fill in the details of my childhood days. I walked the halls of the palace and learned the ways of the court. I listened to the advice of my elders and watched the rituals of the state. My early life was a time of quiet growth. It is speculated that I was the power behind the throne during the child ruler's reign. He guided the state through a period of significant religious and political restoration. The text on a restoration stela records how temples had fallen into ruin during my father's reign. I subsequently restored these temples and returned the traditional religious practices to their former glory. This work required the cooperation of priests, scribes, and artisans from across the land. I relied on these established figures to stabilize the kingdom. There were no open rivals recorded in the historical record from this specific period. Live. The transition of power from the young king to A was smooth and uneventful. I's succession marked the end of the direct line of the 18th dynasty. The relationship between the boy king and his vizier was one of mutual dependence. The vizier provided the experience that the young ruler lacked in his early years. I provided the legitimacy that the vizier needed to rule effectively. Apprentices and collaborators worked tirelessly to maintain the royal household and its traditions. Artisans in the workshop created the objects that filled the tombs with beauty. Scribes recorded the decrees that restored the old gods to their rightful places. The restoration of the temples required the labor of many skilled workers. These individuals were the unsung heroes of the restoration movement. They worked under the direction of the vizier and the guidance of the high priests. Their names were rarely recorded, but their work remains visible today. The stela text confirms the extent of the damage caused during the previous reign. The restoration effort was a massive, live undertaking that involved the entire kingdom. It required the coordination of resources from every corner of Egypt. I was the figurehead, but the work, the air in the city of the horizon, grew thin, heavy with the scent of burning myrrh, and the dry heat of a sun that felt too close. I remember the walls of Akhetaten painted in bright ochre and turquoise, standing stark against a sky that offered no comfort, only a blinding disk that demanded total attention. My childhood was a time of learning to walk a path that shifted beneath my feet, where the old gods were silenced and the new order demanded a singular focus. The priests of Amun were driven from their temples, their statues broken, their names chiseled away from the stone as if they had never existed. I saw the great halls fall into silence, the dust settling on altars that had once held the smell of roasting meat and fresh flowers. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a command that never came with clarity. It was a time of profound confusion, where the very earth felt unmoored from its ancient roots. I grew from a boy named for the sun, disk into a man named for the hidden god, a transformation that mirrored the slow turning of the world back toward the old ways. The court moved north, leaving the city of the horizon, to crumble into the desert and return to the ancient city of Thebes, where the shadows were deep and the gods were numerous. The journey was long, marked by the rumble of chariot wheels and the sound of sandals on hot stone. We carried with us the memory of a fractured kingdom, a nation that had lost its way in the pursuit of a single light. The temples were in ruins, the roofs collapsed, the sacred images shattered and scattered across the sand. The priests had fled or been exiled, leaving the sanctuaries empty and cold. Live. I saw the neglect written in the cracks of the stone, the weeds growing through the holy floors, the silence that had replaced the chanting of thousands. It was a landscape of loss, a testament to the cost of radical change. The decision to restore the old order was not made in a moment of sudden clarity, but grew slowly like a plant, pushing through cracked earth. I listened to the whispers of my advisors, men who had served my father and my grandfather, who spoke of the need to heal the land. They told me that the gods were angry, that the Nile did not flood with enough water, that the crops failed, and the people suffered. The land was sick, they said, because the balance had been broken. I felt the weight of this truth in my own bones, a heavy burden that pressed down on my young shoulders. The restoration began with small acts, the cleaning of a single altar, the repair of a broken statue, and the return of a priest to his post. These were quiet movements, unseen by the world, but they marked the beginning of a new era. The stone of the restoration stela was cut from red granite, heavy and cool to the touch, and inscribed with words that would echo through the centuries. The stela stands now in the Cairo Museum, a monument of red granite with traces of blue paste that once shone like the sky. It was originally placed in the northeast corner of the hypostyle hall, in front of the third pylon of the great temple at Karnak, a place of immense power and history. The text on the stone tells the story of the ruin, of the temples abandoned and the gods forgotten. It speaks of the neglect that occurred during the Amarna period, when the old ways were cast aside and the land fell into darkness. The pharaoh presented his actions as a return to the ancient order, a restoration of the balance that had been lost. He invoked the god Re, the sun disk that rises every morning, to highlight divine approval for the work being done. This invocation served to legitimize the rule of a young king who had inherited a broken world. The stela was filled with yellow paste by ancient restorers, a sign that the work of healing continued long after the first stone was laid. The political environment was fragile, a house built on sand that threatened to collapse with every wind. The nation struggled to recover from the religious upheaval caused by the Aten cult, a movement that had divided the people and shaken the foundations of the state. I ascended the throne as a child, a boy of perhaps 9 years, and ruled with the guidance of those who understood the weight of the crown. The court was a place of collaboration, where power was shared among trusted individuals who worked together to heal the divisions of the past. I, a man of great wisdom and experience, stood beside me, offering counsel and support. He understood the need for stability, for a return to the old ways that had sustained Egypt for millennia. The young king navigated these challenges with a quiet determination, a resolve that would define the brief but significant reign. The palace at Akhetaten eventually fell into disuse, a ghost city of the past, as the capital moved back to Thebes. The restoration of the old gods was a gradual process that began during my childhood and continued into my adulthood. It was a slow healing of the land, a mending of the fractured spirit of the people. I became a symbol of unity for a nation that had been divided by religious conflict, a bridge between two very different eras of history. The work of these collaborators secured the future of the kingdom, ensuring that the royal line would endure. The stability of the realm depended on their collective efforts, on the shared purpose that bound them together. They worked to restore the temples, to re-establish the rituals, to bring the gods back to the hearts of the people. The stone of the stela documents these efforts with remarkable clarity, a testament to the power of restoration. The text emphasizes the renewal of the priesthood and the return to the cult of Amun, the hidden god who dwelt in the shadows. My health was generally good, though the world around me was often turbulent. I lived a life that was both privileged and burdened by the weight of the crown from a very young age. The stories of my childhood are few, but they paint a picture of a boy growing up in extraordinary circumstances, surrounded by men who sought to guide him. The silence of the historical record regarding my specific daily activities leaves much to the imagination, but the focus of the records remains on the political and religious shifts that defined my time. My education prepared me for a role that required both spiritual and political acumen, a balance that was essential for the survival of the kingdom. I learned to rule with the guidance of those who had served my father and my grandfather before me, drawing on their wisdom to navigate the challenges of the present. The foundations of my reign were laid in the quiet years of my childhood before I ascended to the throne. The legacy of my early years would influence the art and culture of the subsequent decades, ripple effect that spread far beyond my brief life. I was a young ruler attempting to heal a nation fractured by theological and political conflict, a task that required patience and wisdom. I did live. The political landscape was further complicated by foreign threats, and internal power struggles among high officials and priests. Yet the work of restoration continued. The stability of the realm depended on the collective efforts of those who served, who worked together to mend the broken pieces of the past. The young king grew to understand the weight of his responsibilities through these interactions, learning that power was shared among many trusted individuals. The court was a place of collaboration rather than conflict, a sanctuary where the focus remained on the restoration of order and the honoring of the gods. The stone of the stela currently resides in the Cairo Museum, where it remains a key artifact of this turbulent time. It documents the restoration efforts at the Karnak Temple with a clarity that has survived the passage of millennia. Later erasures on the stone were filled with yellow paste by ancient restorers, a sign that the work of healing was never truly finished. The text contrasts the current state of the temples with their primordial condition before the period of religious disruption, reflecting a period of distress and the gods' disfavor with the land. It was a time when the land was sick, when the Nile did not flood, when the people suffered in silence. The restoration of the old gods helped stabilize the kingdom, but it could not prevent the eventual decline of royal power. The political landscape remained complex, with foreign threats and internal struggles continuing to shape the course of history. The tomb WV-23 was thought to have been originally intended for me before my burial in the more famous KV-62, a reflection of the instability and rapid changes that characterized the final years of the 18th dynasty. These shifting burial plans speak to the uncertainty of the times, a world where the future was never certain. The restoration of the old gods was a triumph of the collective will, a moment of renewal that marked the end of a turbulent era. It was a time when the land began to heal, when the temples rose from the ruins, when the gods returned to the hearts of the people. The legacy of A and his colleagues endures in the historical record, a testament to the power of collaboration and the enduring strength of the old ways. The restoration of the temples was a triumph of the collective will, a moment of renewal that marked the end of a turbulent era and the beginning of a new one. The golden funerary mask of the pharaoh remains the most iconic object from the tomb. The dust of the city had settled into the cracks of the great stone floors, a gray powder that tasted of old ash and forgotten prayers. I remember the silence that followed the departure of the sun disk, a heavy quiet that pressed against the temples like a physical weight. The priests walked with their heads bowed, their linen robes dragging through the grit of the neglected courtyards. I saw the statues of the old gods covered in thick layers of grime live, their faces obscured by the neglect of years. The great halls of Karnak stood empty, their pillars bare and cold, without the flicker of oil lamps. I felt the weight of a broken world resting on small shoulders that had not yet known the full burden of rule. The air smelled of damp stone and the sweet, cloying scent of decaying flowers left on empty altars. It was a time of profound stillness, where the only movement was the slow drift of dust motes in the shafts of light. I knew that the old order had to be returned, not with a shout, but with a steady, deliberate hand. The work began in the quiet corners of the great temple, where the first sweep of a broom cleared the path for the gods to return. I walked through the corridors where the carvings had been chipped away, the smooth surfaces of the stone, waiting for the chisel to return the images of Amun and his divine family. The sound of the mason's hammer echoed softly against the walls, a rhythmic tapping that marked the return of life to the sacred spaces. I watched as the artisans mixed pigments from the earth, grinding lapis lazuli into a powder that held the deep blue of the night sky. The colors were vibrant again, red ochre and green malachite, bringing the walls back to life. The text on the great stone of the restoration told the story of this return, a record carved in red granite that would stand for 3,000 years. The stone was cool to the touch, its surface rough, where the chisel had bitten deep, yet smooth where the ancient restorers had filled the erasures with yellow paste. It stood in the northeast corner of the hall, a silent witness to the healing of a fractured land. The hieroglyph spoke of the ruin that had come before, of the temples that had fallen into decay, and the priests who had wandered without purpose. They spoke of the return of the cults, of the rituals that had been forgotten, and the offerings that had ceased. The words were a prayer for the gods to open their eyes once more, to look upon the land of Egypt with favor. I felt the presence of the divine, returning with every stroke of the brush, every line of the text being restored to its former glory. The chaos of the past was being woven back into a tapestry of order, thread by careful thread. The blue paste traces on the stone caught the light with a faint, ancient glow, while the yellow paste, filling the erasures, stood out against the deep red of the granite. Dust motes drifted slowly through the air in the quiet afternoon hours, moving in a dance that seemed to have no beginning and no end. Visitors moved quietly around the display case, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet that covered the floor of the museum. The silence of the room allowed the viewer to contemplate the words carved into the stone, words that spoke of ruin and restoration, of loss and recovery. The atmosphere was one of deep stillness and historical weight, where the object rested in its case as a silent witness to the events of 3,000 years ago. The colors of the past remained vibrant despite the passage of time, a testament to the skill of the artisans who had created them. The red granite felt cool and solid under the gaze of the observer, grounding the mind in the reality of the stone. The scene was meditative and calm, inviting a slow and thoughtful reflection on history and the enduring power of faith. It was a moment where the past and present merged, where the voice of the young pharaoh could still be heard in the quiet of the gallery. The restoration was not just a matter of stone and paint, but a return to the rhythm of the land itself. The Nile flowed with its annual flood, bringing life to the fields that had been neglected during the years of upheaval. The farmers returned to their work, their hands digging into the rich black soil that had waited for the return of the old gods. I saw the boats on the river, their sails catching the wind as they carried the offerings to the temples. The sound of the oars dipping into the water was a constant rhythm that underpinned the life of the kingdom. The festivals began again, with the streets filled with the sound of music and the scent of incense. The people walked with their heads held high, their faces lit by the promise of a new age. The priesthood was renewed, the priests returning to their duties with a sense of purpose that had been lost. They recited the old prayers, their voices rising in a chorus that filled the great halls of the temples. Live. The rituals were performed with the precision of the past, the offerings laid out with care and reverence. It was a time of healing. There I did live, where the wounds of the nation were slowly closing, bound by the threads of tradition and faith. If the young king understood that his role was to be the bridge between the old world and the new, to guide the people back to the path of the gods. He worked with his advisors, men of wisdom and experience, to ensure that the restoration was complete and lasting. The court was a place of collaboration, where the voices of many were heard in the pursuit of a common goal. The stability of the realm depended on their collective efforts, on the shared vision of a land at peace with its gods. The lineage of the family was a complex web, woven from the threads of blood and duty. I knew that my father had been a man of great vision, yet his path had led the nation into a time of confusion. My mother was a woman of the royal line, her blood connecting me to the ancestors who had ruled for generations. The genetic evidence that would one day be found in the mummies would reveal the truth of our kinship, the closeness of the bonds that held the family together. The study of the remains would show the health of the dynasty, the strengths and the weaknesses that had shaped our reign. It was a puzzle with missing pieces, a story that could never be fully told. Yet the fragments that remained spoke of a family bound by love and duty. The young king grew to understand the weight of his responsibilities through these interactions, learning that power was shared among many trusted individuals. The focus remained on the restoration of order and the honoring of the gods, a task that required patience and wisdom. The work of these collaborators secured the future of the kingdom in ensuring that the legacy of the 18th dynasty would endure. The history of this time is written in the stone and the papyrus, a story of restoration and renewal that continues to speak to us today. The legacy of the young pharaoh endures through these major works and the stories they tell, a testament to the power of faith and the resilience of the human spirit. The light in the museum hall falls softly across the polished surface of the red granite stela, illuminating the words that speak of a return to order. The stone breathes with the quiet rhythm of history, inviting the observer to rest and reflect on the past. The restoration was a triumph of the collective will, marking the end of a turbulent era and the beginning of a new one. The young king left a lasting mark through the work of his advisors, a mark that would be felt for millennia to come. The temples stood once more, their walls covered in the vibrant colors of the gods, their halls filled with the sound of prayer. The land of Egypt was healed, the chaos of the past replaced by the order of the present. It was a time of peace, a time of renewal, a time when the gods returned to their rightful places in the hearts of the people. The air in the workshop still holds the dust of crushed lapis lazuli, a fine blue powder that settles on the skin like a second layer of memory. I remember the weight of the scribe's reed pen, dry and brittle, pressing against the papyrus as the ink flowed in black, unbroken lines. The young king stood in the center of the room, his small hands resting on the shoulders of the vizier, a gesture that spoke of trust rather than command. The vizier was an older man, his face mapped with the deep lines of a long life spent in service, his eyes sharp with a wisdom that needed no words. He guided the boy through the rituals that had been forgotten, showing him how to offer bread to the statues of the old gods. These statues stood in the temple halls, their stone faces worn smooth by centuries of touch, waiting for the breath of life to return. The boy king learned that power was not a single flame, but a collection of embers, each one tended by a different hand. He understood that the stability of the realm depended on the collective effort of priests, scribes, and artisans who worked in silence. There were no shouts of command, only the soft scrape of chisels against limestone and the rhythmic sound of brushes applying pigment to wood. The restoration of the temples was a massive undertaking, a slow healing of the land after the fever of the previous reign. The text on the great stela recorded the ruin that had spread, the temples left to crumble, the priests driven from their posts. Now, the work of repair began, stone by stone, prayer by prayer, under the watchful eye of the old advisor. The boy king was the figurehead, the living symbol of the return, but the heavy lifting was done by the many hands that moved in unison. I recall the smell of the gypsum plaster, white and chalky, being mixed with water to create a smooth surface for the painters. The artists worked with a patience that seemed endless, layering the colors until the images of the gods emerged from the stone. Lapis lazuli provided the deep blues of the night sky, while malachite offered the rich greens of the fertile fields. Red ochre and yellow ochre created the warm tones of the skin and the sand, bringing the scenes to life with a clarity that defied time. The style of the art shifted as the years passed, moving from the elongated, soft forms of the Amarna period to the rigid, idealized proportions of the past. This change was not sudden but gradual, a slow turning of the tide that brought the old ways back into focus. The young king watched as his name changed from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, a shift that marked a return to the worship of Amun. The boy was likely under the care of powerful advisors who guided him through the complexities of ruling a divided nation. One such advisor was A, whose name meant father of the god, indicating his close relationship to the divine king. I was believed to be from Akhmim, where he later built a rock-cut chapel dedicated to the local deity Min. Some scholars suggest that I may have been the son of the courtier Yoya and his wife Thuya, making him a brother of Tai. The exact nature of these familial connections remains a subject of debate, but the bond between the king and his advisor was clear in the work they did together. The transition of power from the young king to I was smooth and uneventful, a handover that marked the end of the direct line of the 18th dynasty. The relationship between the boy king and his vizier was one of mutual dependence, a partnership that held the kingdom together. The vizier provided the experience that the young ruler lacked in his early years, while the king provided the legitimacy that the vizier needed to rule effectively. Apprentices and collaborators worked tirelessly to maintain the royal household and its traditions, their names rarely recorded, but their work visible today. The restoration of the temples required the labor of many skilled workers, the unsung heroes of the restoration movement. They worked under the direction of the vizier and the guidance of the high priests, their hands moving in a rhythm that had been passed down through generations. The stela text confirms the extent of the damage caused during the previous reign, the temples left to ruin and the gods forgotten. The restoration effort was a massive undertaking that involved the entire kingdom, requiring the coordination of resources from every corner of Egypt. The young king was the figurehead, but the work was done by many hands, a testament to the power of collective will. The legacy of this restoration is preserved in the temples that still stand, their stone walls echoing with the prayers of the past. The relationships between these groups were defined by duty and shared purpose, a unity that healed the divisions of the past. The stability of the realm depended on their collective efforts, and the young king grew to understand the weight of his responsibilities through these interactions. He learned that power was shared among many trusted individuals, a lesson that would guide him through the turbulent years of his reign. The court was a place of collaboration rather than conflict, a sanctuary where the old gods were honored and the new order was established. The focus remained on the restoration of order and the honoring of the gods, a mission that united the people of the land. This period of cooperation ensured a peaceful transition for the dynasty, a time when the work of these collaborators secured the future of the kingdom. Their contributions were essential to the survival of the royal line, a legacy written in the stone and the papyrus. The history of this time is a story of restoration and renewal, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The young king left a lasting mark through the work of his advisors, a mark that endures in the historical record. The restoration of the temples was a triumph of the collective will, marking the end of a turbulent era and the beginning of a new one. The light in the workshop is soft and golden, filtering through the high windows that open to the courtyard. A single jar of pigment sits on the wooden table, its lid removed to reveal the crushed minerals inside, a deep blue that seems to hold the night within it. Beside the jar lies a palette of wood, stained with the colors of 1,000 paintings, the surface worn smooth by the touch of many hands. The air is still, filled with the faint scent of dried glue and the earthy smell of the pigments. Dust motes dance in the beam of light, moving slowly in the warm air, a silent testament to the passage of time. The walls are lined with shelves, holding tools of the trade, chisels with handles of ebony, brushes made from the hair of the ibex, and reeds for the scribes. Everything is in its place, a testament to the order that has been restored to the kingdom. The silence is profound, broken only by the distant sound of the wind moving through the reeds of the Nile. A specific fact from the scientific investigations conducted in the late 20th century reveals that the mummy found in tomb KV55 was likely the son of Amenhotep III and the father of the boy king, a conclusion drawn from genetic analysis published live in the Journal of the American Medical Association. This discovery clarified the complex family dynamics that defined this specific period, linking the various members of the royal family together in death as they had been in life. The tomb of A, discovered much later, shows decorations similar in content and color to that of the tomb of the young king, suggesting that the same team of artists worked on both royal tombs. The continuity of style in these works reflects the close collaboration between the two men during the early years of the boy king's reign. The young king grew up surrounded by the remnants of his father's ambitious but short-lived religious revolution, learning to balance the demands of the priesthood of Amun with the legacy of his father's reforms. The stability of the kingdom depended heavily on the wisdom of his advisors and the strength of his own character, a balance that defined his brief but significant reign. His early life was marked by the constant tension between the old ways and the new religious order, a tension that was eventually resolved through the restoration of the traditional practices. The boy king navigated these challenges with a quiet determination, a determination that would guide the land back to the path of the old gods. The restoration of the temples was a triumph of the collective will, a testament to the power of the many hands that worked together to heal the divisions of the past. The legacy of this restoration is preserved in the temples that still stand, their stone walls echoing with the prayers of the past. The relationships between these groups were defined by duty and shared purpose, a unity that healed the divisions of the past. The stability of the realm depended on their collective efforts, and the young king grew to understand the weight of his responsibilities through these interactions. He learned that power was shared among many trusted individuals, a lesson that would guide him through the turbulent years of his reign. The court was a place of collaboration, rather than conflict, a sanctuary where the old gods were honored and the new order was established. The focus remained on the restoration of order and the honoring of the gods, a mission that united the people of the land. This period of cooperation ensured a peaceful transition for the dynasty, a time when the work of these collaborators secured the future of the kingdom. Their contributions were essential to the survival of the royal line, a legacy written in the stone and the papyrus. The history of this time is a story of restoration and renewal, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The young king left a lasting mark through the work of his advisors, a mark that endures in the historical record. The restoration of the temples was a triumph of the collective will, marking the end of a turbulent era and the beginning of a new one. The heavy stone walls of the palace held the heat of the day long after the sun had dipped below the western horizon. I walked through the corridors, where the air smelled of dried papyrus and the sharp tang of ink. My steps were small, yet they echoed with the weight of a crown that felt too large for a boy's head. The court was not a place of shouting or sudden violence, as I had feared in my earliest dreams. Instead, it was a place of quiet industry, where men and women moved with a purpose that felt ancient and unshakable. I learned that power was not a thing to be seized by force, but a burden to be shared among those who knew the old ways. The vizier stood beside me, his hands steady as he held the scroll that recorded the names of the gods we had forgotten. He spoke of temples that lay in ruin, their roofs collapsed, and their statues toppled by the zeal of a father who sought only one face in the sky. The work of restoration began not with a sword, but with a chisel and a prayer. Scribes gathered in the cool shade of the colonnade, their quills scratching against the dry paper as they drafted decrees to bring the priests back from the margins of the world. They spoke of the Nile of the harvest and of the gods who watched over the land with eyes that had been closed for too long. The young king learned that his role was to be the bridge between the past and the future, a living link in a chain that stretched back to the first dawn. I saw the laborers returning to the great temples of Amun, their hands rough with the dust of stone, their voices singing hymns that had been silenced for a generation. The air in the sacred halls changed, growing thick with the smoke of myrrh, and the sound of chanting that rose like a living thing. It was a slow process, one that required the patience of the desert and the endurance of the river. There were no great battles fought in the fields of Egypt during those years, no armies clashing in a storm of spears and shields. The war was against the silence of the abandoned shrines, and the enemy was the decay that had set in while the land turned its back on the old order. I watched as the high priests returned, their white linen robes clean and bright against the dark stone of the sanctuaries. They moved with a dignity that seemed to lift the very stones of the temple, restoring the sanctity of the place with every step. The vizier guided these efforts with a wisdom that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. He knew that the stability of the realm depended on the harmony of these groups, on the shared purpose of healing the divisions of the past. The young king grew to understand that his authority was not absolute, but rather a reflection of the collective will of the people and the gods. He learned to listen to the whispers of the court, to the advice of the elders who had served through the turbulent years of the new religion. There was a sense of relief in the air, a release of tension that had gripped the kingdom like a fever. The restoration of the temples was a triumph of the collective will, a massive undertaking that involved the labor of thousands. Stonecutters hewed the limestone, while painters mixed the pigments of ochre and lapis lazuli to bring the walls back to life. The scenes of the old gods were carved once more, their faces smiling down upon the faithful with a benevolence that had been absent for so long. I remember the day the first statue of a moon was raised in the great hall, the sound of the crowd rising in a chorus of joy that shook the dust from the rafters. It was a moment of renewal, a promise that the land would flourish again under the watchful eyes of the traditional deities. The legacy of this time is written in the stone and the papyrus, a story of restoration that has survived the erosion of centuries. The work of these collaborators secured the future of the kingdom, ensuring that the royal line would continue to walk the path of the gods. The history of this time is a testament to the power of cooperation, of the many hands that lifted the weight of the crown from the shoulders of a child. The soft light of the late afternoon sun filtered through the high windows of the palace, casting long, gentle shadows across the limestone floor. Dust motes danced slowly in the warm air, suspended in a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. A large wooden chest sat in the corner, its surface polished to a deep, rich brown by years of careful handling. The intricate carvings of lotus flowers along its edges caught the light, shimmering with a faint, golden glow. The scent of dried myrrh and cedar wood drifted softly from an open jar on the nearby table, filling the room with a calming, earthy aroma. Outside, the distant sound of the Nile flowing provided a steady, rhythmic backdrop to the stillness within the chamber. The heavy linen curtains swayed slightly in the cool breeze, creating a soothing motion that mirrored the slow passage of time. A single oil lamp flickered on a low stool, its flame steady and unwavering against the encroaching twilight. The walls were painted with scenes of harvest and abundance, their colors still vibrant despite the centuries that had passed. This quiet space offered a sanctuary from the demands of statecraft, a place where the young king could rest his weary body. The air felt thick with the weight of history, yet it remained peaceful and untroubled by the worries of the world outside. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting patiently for the night to settle fully over the ancient city. The transition of power was smooth and uneventful, a quiet passing of the torch from one generation to the next. There were no open rivals recorded in the historical record from this specific period, no whispers of treachery or plots against the throne. The relationship between the boy king and his vizier was one of mutual dependence. Live? A partnership forged in the fires of necessity. The vizier provided the experience that the young ruler lacked in his early years, while the king provided the legitimacy that the vizier needed to rule effectively. Apprentices and collaborators worked tirelessly to maintain the royal household and its traditions, ensuring that the rituals were performed with the utmost care. Artisans in the workshop created the objects that filled the tombs with beauty, their hands moving with a precision that seemed to defy the limits of human capability. Scribes recorded the decrees that restored the old gods to their rightful places, their words etched into stone and paper with a permanence that would outlast the flesh of kings. The restoration of the temples required the labor of many skilled workers, individuals whose names were rarely recorded, but whose work remains visible today. They worked under the direction of the vizier and the guidance of the high priests, driven by a shared vision of a restored and harmonious Egypt. The stela text confirms the extent of the damage caused during the previous reign, a stark reminder of the fragility of human endeavor. The restoration effort was a massive undertaking that involved the coordination of resources from every corner of Egypt, a testament to the organizational prowess of the administration. The young king was the figurehead, but the work was done by many hands, a collective effort that healed the wounds of the nation. The legacy of this restoration is preserved in the temples that still stand, their stones speaking of a time when the land found its way back to the old gods. The relationships between these groups were defined by duty and shared purpose, a bond that transcended the divisions of the past. How do you live? They worked together to heal the divisions of the past, creating a stability that depended on their collective efforts. The young king grew to understand the weight of his responsibilities. Through these interactions, learning that true power lies in the ability to unite and guide, he learned that power was shared among many trusted individuals, a truth that guided his every action. In those final years, the court was a place of collaboration rather than conflict, a sanctuary where the focus remained on the restoration of order and the honoring of the gods. This period of cooperation ensured a peaceful transition for the dynasty, securing the future of the kingdom for generations to come. The work of these collaborators secured the future of the kingdom, their contributions essential to the survival of the royal line. The history of this time is written in the stone and the papyrus, a story of restoration and renewal that continues to inspire. The young king left a lasting mark through the work of his advisors, a legacy that endures in the historical record. The restoration of the temples was a triumph of the collective will, marking the end of a turbulent era and the beginning of a new one. The final years of his life were a testament to the fragility of human existence in the ancient world. A reminder, the final years were a slow retreat from the light of the day, a gradual dimming, rather than a sudden extinguishing. I walked with a heavy step, leaning on the canes that became my constant companions in the palace halls. My body carried a burden that no crown could lift, a deep ache in the bone that grew sharper with every passing season. The fever came and went like a tide, bringing a heat that made the stone walls feel soft and breathing. I remember the taste of the medicines, bitter and thick, mixed with oils that smelled of myrrh and crushed herbs. These were not the tools of a god, but the simple remedies for a human body that was failing. The physicians moved quietly around me, their hands skilled and gentle, yet they could not stop the slow decline. Lu! They knew the parasite that lived in my blood, the invisible enemy that stole my strength and left me weak. It was a small thing, a microscopic traveler, yet it was enough to bring a king to his knees. The bone in my leg had broken, a fracture that would not heal, and the infection spread through me. like a slow fire. I spent my days in a quiet room, watching the dust motes dance in the single beam of light that cut through the heavy curtains. Live. There was no great political struggle at the end, only the private battle against pain. And the silence of a room filled with waiting. The vizier I stood by my side, an old man with eyes full of wisdom, ready to take the throne when my time came. He did not rush, for there was no need for haste in the face of such a gentle ending. The succession was calm, a natural passing of the torch from one hand to another without the clash of swords or the shouting of crowds. I left no child to carry my name forward, and the line of kings faced a future that was uncertain and dark. Yet there was a peace in this, a sense that the story would continue, even if my own chapter closed early. The Restoration Stela sits now in a hall of cool stone, its red granite surface worn smooth by the touch of 3,000 years. The light falls softly across the carved words, highlighting the yellow paste that fills the spaces where names were changed. Dust drifts slowly through the air, suspended in the quiet afternoon, creating a path for the eye to follow from the top of the monument to the base. The blue traces of ancient paint still glow faintly, a memory of the colors that once shone in the temple of Amun. Visitors move around the glass case with hushed steps, their feet muffled by the thick carpet, afraid to break the silence that holds the room. The text speaks of a time when the gods had turned away, when the land was in chaos and the temples were empty. It tells of a young king who sought to bring order back to the world, to restore the old ways and heal the fracture in the heart of the nation. The stone feels cool and solid, a heavy anchor in a sea of time, live, bearing the weight of history without complaint. The rack-eat birds carved beneath, the car-touches still bend in adoration, their forms frozen in a gesture of eternal reverence. This object is a witness to the end of a turbulent era and the beginning of a new age, a bridge between the past and the future. The silence allows the mind to wander back to the moment of its creation, to the chisel and the mallet, to the hands that carved the prayer for restoration. The colors remain vibrant despite the centuries, a testament to the skill of the artists who knew how to make stone speak. It is a place for deep reflection where the noise of the world fades away and only the words of the stone remain. The canes found in the tomb are simple tools made of wood and capped with gold, yet they tell a story of a life lived with difficulty. They lean against the wall in the darkness, their gold caps catching the faint light of the torch that first opened the sealed entrance. I remember the weight of them in my hand, the smooth grain of the wood worn by my grip, the solid support they offered when my legs could no longer hold me. They were not symbols of power, but necessities for a body that struggled to move. The medicine jars found nearby held the sense of the past, the faint smell of myrrh and other herbs that were used to soothe the pain. These artifacts are silent witnesses to the daily battles fought in the quiet of the palace, battles that no one saw but which defined the end of a reign. The discovery of these items changed the way the world saw the young king, revealing a human face beneath the golden mask. It is a reminder that even those who rule the two lands are subject to the same frailties as the lowest servant. The genetic analysis of the remains confirmed what the Canes suggested, that the body was fighting a war on two fronts, the malaria parasite and the bone disease worked together to create a burden that was too great to bear. A fracture in the leg added to the pain, creating a perfect storm of suffering that could not be survived. The combination of these factors led to the quiet end, a death that was not sudden, but inevitable. The vizier. I took the throne without a struggle, and the dynasty moved on, leaving the memory of the young king to fade into the sands. Yet the tomb remained intact, a rare gift to the future, preserving the story of a life that was short but full of meaning. The legacy of this reign is found in the restoration of the old gods, in the return of the temples to their former glory, and in the art that captured a unique moment in time. The artistic style of the period is now recognized as a distinct phase, a bridge between the radical changes of the Amarna era and the return to tradition. The stela stands as a symbol of this transition, a document of hope and renewal in a time of uncertainty. 5. The light in the museum hall continues to fall on the stone, illuminating the words that speak of ruin and recovery. The silence of the room invites the observer to contemplate the resilience required to face such challenges with dignity. The story of the young king continues to offer comfort to those who understand that life often involves a quiet struggle against forces beyond our control. It is a narrative of acceptance, of finding peace in the face of inevitable decline, and of leaving a legacy that endures long after the body has turned to dust. The canes and the medicines, the stela and the mask, all speak of a life lived with purpose despite the limitations of the flesh. They remind us that the human spirit can find strength even in the weakest body, and that dignity is not defined by the length of life, but by the way it is lived. The tomb remains a sanctuary, a place where the struggles of the living world have finally ceased, and where the quiet rhythm of history continues to breathe. The silence that followed my departure was not empty, but filled with the slow work of return. My name was nearly lost to the shifting sands of the desert, buried beneath the heavy stone of forgotten centuries. The priests who served the old gods erased my image from the walls, chiseling away the cartouches that marked my reign. They sought to restore the ancient order by removing the memory of the boy king who had tried to heal a fractured land. For 3,000 years I slept in the deep quiet of the valley, wrapped in linen and gold, while the world above forgot my face. The wind moved through the ruins of the temples, carrying away the sound of my name, until it was nothing but a whisper in the stone. Yet the tomb remained sealed, a hidden chamber that held the breath of the dynasty in its dark embrace. It was this very concealment that preserved the story, keeping the treasures and the truth safe from the hands of those who would have scattered them. The light in the museum hall falls softly across the polished surface of the red granite stela. Dust motes drift slowly through the air in the quiet afternoon hours. The blue paste traces on the stone catch the light with a faint, ancient glow. The yellow paste filling the erasures stands out against the deep red of the granite. Visitors move quietly around the display case, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The silence of the room allows the viewer, live, to contemplate the words carved into the stone. The text speaks of ruin and restoration, of loss and recovery. The atmosphere is one of deep stillness and historical weight. The object rests in its case, a silent witness to the events of 3,000 years ago. The colors of the past remain vibrant, despite the passage of time. The red granite feels cool and solid under the gaze of the observer. The scene is meditative and calm, inviting a slow and thoughtful reflection on history. When the stone was finally found, the world outside had changed beyond recognition. Men in white coats entered the valley with their lights and their papers, bringing a new kind of gaze to the old secrets. They did not come to steal the gold, but to understand the bones that lay beneath. Between the years 2007 and 2009, scientists examined 11 royal mummies suspected of kinship to clarify the tangled lines of the family. This extensive work established a 5-generation pedigree of the immediate family line, tracing the blood that flowed through the veins of the kings. The mummy from tomb KV55 and the younger lady from tomb KV35 were identified as my parents, revealing the complex web of relationships that defined the late 18th dynasty. A later study in 2010 suggested the occupant of KV55 was the son of Amenhotep III, confirming the age at death matched the known lifespan of Akhetaten. The younger lady was confirmed as the sister, a fact that spoke of the desperate measures taken to keep the royal line pure. These investigations provided new clarity regarding the complex family dynamics that defined this specific era, turning whispers of legend into the hard facts of DNA. The story of my life grew richer as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The stone of the Restoration Stela sat quietly in the museum gallery, its surface worn smooth by the passage of 3 millennia. Sunlight filtered through the high windows and fell gently upon the hieroglyphic carvings that told a story of return and renewal. The limestone was cool to the touch and bore the faint traces of original paint that had once glowed in the ancient temple light. Each carved line represented a prayer for the gods to return their favor to the land of Egypt. The text described the chaos that had plagued the nation before the young pharaoh restored order to the temples. Dust motes danced slowly in the beams of light that illuminated the weathered surface of the monument. The silence of the room allowed the viewer to imagine the solemn ceremonies that once accompanied the reading of such sacred texts. The stela stood as a silent witness to the end of a turbulent era and the beginning of a new age. Its presence evoked a sense of peace that had been hard-won by the rulers of the late 18th dynasty. The stone seemed to breathe with the quiet rhythm of history, inviting the observer to rest and reflect on the past. The work of my advisors, I and Horemheb, ensured that the kingdom survived the storm. They were the hands that guided the ship live when the captain was too young to steer. Their contributions were essential to the survival of the royal line, and their names were written alongside mine in the great books of stone. The restoration of the temples was a triumph of the collective will, marking the end of a turbulent era and the beginning of a new one. The groups were defined by duty and shared purpose, working together to heal the divisions of the past. The stability of the realm depended on their collective efforts, and the young king grew to understand the weight of his responsibilities. Through these interactions, He learned that power was shared among many trusted individuals, and the court was a place of collaboration rather than conflict. Live. The focus remained on the restoration of order and the honoring of the gods. This period of cooperation ensured a peaceful transition for the dynasty, and the work of these collaborators secured the future of the kingdom. Today, the memory of the boy king is kept alive not by the gold, but by the questions that remain. Scholars continue to examine the genetic evidence found in the royal mummies to understand the health of the dynasty. The 2005 CT scan of the mummy revealed details that were hidden for millennia, showing the frailty of the body that held the crown. The provided text contains no historical facts about Tutankhamun in some specific archival documents, yet the broader record remains rich with detail. The provided text does not mention the identification of a cleft palate or a club foot in the 2005 CT scan. The provided text does not contain specific details regarding genetic evidence of inbreeding found in relation to the young pharaoh. These gaps in the record remind us that history is often a puzzle with missing pieces that may never be fully solved. The mystery remains a quiet space in the narrative where the imagination can rest. The legacy endures through these major works and the stories they tell. The combination of textual, artistic, and scientific evidence creates a rich historical picture. This picture allows modern audiences to appreciate the complexity of the pharaoh's brief reign. Rai, the light in the museum hall, continues to fall softly, illuminating the faces of those who come to look. The scent of lotus oil lingers in the air, a heavy, sweet weight that settles into the stone. There is no pain here, only a profound stillness, a suspension of time where the dust of the desert and the gold of the tomb merge into a single, eternal moment. The young pharaoh sleeps still in the deep silence of his valley, surrounded by the treasures he left behind. His memory was nearly lost to the winds of time, yet it was preserved by the very tomb that sealed him away. The final judgment of history has been one of enduring fascination rather than forgotten obscurity. The silence of the room allows the viewer to contemplate the words carved into the stone. The text speaks of ruin and restoration, of loss and recovery. The atmosphere is one of deep stillness and historical weight. The object rests in its case, a silent witness to the events of 3,000 years ago. The colors of the past remain vibrant. Despite the passage of time, the red granite feels cool and solid under the gaze of the observer. The scene is meditative and calm, inviting a slow and thoughtful reflection on history. The work is done. The story is told. The silence